Hello everybody, welcome to another video. I am Ursula, I make comics, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about fight scenes or action scenes in your comics, and I wanted to show a good example and a bad example from my own comics. When I first started out, I really didn't quite understand how to draw action scenes, fight scenes, but I have since learned quite a lot. So I'm gonna start with an old action scene. I think I drew this back in 2015. This is from our comic Sovereign, which is like an action adventure comedy fantasy story. This 3 pages that I've grabbed, it is an action scene where our main character Elias, he is hanging out with his friend Eris, and then their ship is attacked by a bunch of dark mages. And at first Elias is like, oh, dark mages, because he's from the Dark Kingdom. He's essentially like the prince. They're called ambassadors because they like speak to the gods and stuff. But anyways, so he sees these soldiers from his country show up, and he's like, oh, they're coming to help, like, you know, oh, don't attack, everything's okay. Because he's been kidnapped by pirates, by the way. So he's like, no, they're cool. And then the dark mage attacks him. Another soldier shows up behind him, and they go to stab him, and he's like, oh my god, what the heck. And then our pirate captain Rael jumps in and bomps the dark mage, and another pirate crewmate gets the other one that's behind Elias, and Elias falls and he scrambles away, and then the pirates kick the mages off the ship. And then Elias realizes, like, oh my god, my own country's trying to assassinate me. But anyways. So yeah, this is just a small portion, but I think it was a good example of like a bad action scene that I've made. So I think it starts off well. It has a good establishment where we're transitioning from a scene where these two characters are talking. They're basically sitting in this position, and then this like dark magic shows up, and from Elias's, like the way he's looking, where the smoke's coming in, we can tell that he's looking toward this doorway. It helps that I have our mage showing up in the doorway. We see this is the source of the magic. And then I'm glad that I put Elias here in the corner as a signifier of like position. Like we know where these two are in position of each other. He gets up. He goes to this door that we've already like signposted. He goes to the door. He comes out, talks to the character. So that's like a decent like setup to things about to happen. You know, it's not like the best artwork I've ever done, but it sets up kind of where they are and where he's moving to. It's not super confusing about what's happening on this first page. And honestly, this second page isn't half bad. Again, the characters haven't moved very far from their positions. We've swapped the camera around so it was facing this way. We were over by the mage, facing Elias. Now it's flipped, where we're behind Elias looking at the mage, so that's not too confusing. It is pretty easy for the audience to figure out where we are. I even think that like this magic stuff is pretty dynamic. Having it come towards the camera creates like some depth and dynamicness. There's lots of like movement going on in the mage's pose, in Elias's hair. And in the next panel, we have the other soldier come up behind him and grab him. I think that's fine that the soldier kind of comes out of nowhere, as this is like an ambush attack, and it's supposed to be that like the magic is obscuring everything and making it hard to see. So I don't mind so much that this other soldier just shows up out of nowhere. Whereas like maybe in another scene, if it was out in the open and he was like, we could see he was surrounded by people and they were closing in, then I might want to signpost like, oh, there's all these soldiers that are around them. But in this scene in particular, that doesn't bother me so much. And we don't move very far in time as the first mage approaches with her sword, and we see Elias's reaction and then another close-up reaction. Like, that's not terrible. We're setting up tension. We're showing like, you know, the reveal that they're here to attack him and to murder him. So that's not terrible. It's this last page that really bothers me. And it's something I see in a lot of the work of artists who are newer to like creating action scenes. as I was when I made these, where in this last page, I had a good sense of the action. I like this first panel. I like it because it shows the action really well. For one, the action is framed in the scene really well. We've got this like line of action through Raelle as she's jumping and hitting the mage. We've got a nice reaction of the curve of the mage, like as she as she gets bounced back. And Elias is in the same position as he was on this page up here. So it creates this illusion that this has happened like in an instant. Like it's happened so fast that Elias hasn't even changed position from when he's like backing away from being hit. So he's still here, but then these other two have like come in and got the bad guys, you know? So I think this first panel works really well. If only I'd stuck with it. And again, I don't mind so much that these characters have appeared out of nowhere because again, it's, you know, it's dark, it's hard to see things, and this is definitely like a surprise retaliation against these enemies in the story. So then at some point Elias falls, that's fine. We get his reaction where he's panicking and then we see him crawling away. I'm not a huge fan of these 3 panels. I guess I don't mind the first 2, like they're okay. I would have switched Elias so that he was a bit more, he was positioned in the same kind of direction as he is in this panel. Here he's like flipped, so he's oriented more this way instead of that way. I think it would be a little bit more clear if I had kept the orientation of the camera and where he is. It just makes it a little confusing. And then I really am not a huge fan of this last panel where he suddenly is up and crawling away. It's the reason it bothers me is there's just too much, I think, position change between these two, and there's not very much like background information going on. It's hard to tell because he does just fall on like these blank boards, and then he gets up and he's crawling away against these black boards, and like we're not seeing the other characters who are part of this scene. Like we have no idea where the soldiers went, we have no idea where the pirates went. He's just alone and he's crawling away in this like blank space essentially. I think it gets enough information across of like he's crawling away to hide and getting out of the way, but it's just not framed in a very clear way following like this panel. And then it's even more disorienting because we switch to Raelle. She's like over by the edge of the ship, like far away from the door that they were beside, and she's suddenly kicking off the soldier. And like I know this is the soldier because I drew this for one, and I know what their uniform looks like, but it's really hard to tell just from these boots like what we're looking at here. But it seems like she has won the fight that has happened while Elias was crawling away, that we had no idea was happening, and she's kicked this mage off. And then the other pirate has come and cut the, you know, what must have been the grappling hook that let them get on the ship kind of thing. So I guess between these two, it's not terrible. I would have liked to see this guy maybe somewhere in this panel approaching, just so that it's a little more clear when he shows up beside her and like cuts the rope. But overall, this page is just, it has such a strong start and then it just flops hard down here, you know? It's very confusing. So we have the confusion of Elias kind of walking around in blank space where everyone around him has disappeared, and then we're not showing any of the fight that's actually happening. We're just seeing like the end of it. It's really confusing to see like what has happened to these two soldiers, what has Raelle done to them, where did this guy go? It's just really confusing. And on top of that, this panel in particular bothers me because, and it might be that it's happening on its own and we're missing all that surrounding information, but I'm really annoyed that compositionally, like the action is hard to decipher. I guess you can tell that she's kicked, and this is like the aftermath of her kick, because her leg is up. We've got the motion of her ponytail to show maybe it was like a spin kick, and the guy's flying away, but it, you know, we don't see who the character is, we don't see any of the impact on this character. I wish this was just like a bigger panel that showed more. And that is often something I have seen in, people who are new to this in my old work, where a lot of the action happens in like the corners of panels, or it happens off panel and we see like the aftermath. And I think part of it, I know for me, part of it was like not being able to draw it very well, or feeling like I didn't have enough space on the page to make it happen, because at this point I'd drawn enough action scenes where like I knew this worked. I knew that like a really compelling like punch or kick or whatever could really make a difference. And I framed this so well that it's really frustrating to see this one down here where everything is like off panel and we're missing all that external information. I think that's what makes fight scenes and action scenes the most frustrating to read, is when you don't know what's happening. And clearly that's what I'm the most frustrated with in this old piece. So now I want to talk about a more recent set of pages from one of our more recent comics, The Scourge of Nine Point. So this is a recent scene from The Scourge of Nine Point, where we have our main character, Marble, a little baby raccoon. He's a cat, but don't tell him that. He thinks he's a raccoon. Anyway, so it's nighttime. He's snuck away from his stepdad, and he sees these two cats that are walking down here. He looks at his paw and he's like, oh, it matches the paw of that cat. And he says, oh my god, Arctic raccoons, because his mom told him that he is an Arctic raccoon, and that's why he doesn't look like the other raccoons. And so his first time seeing cats, he's like, oh my god, Arctic raccoons, they're like me. And so he jumps out, he's like, oh my god, and they're like, huh? And Lady Larkbane, our villainess here, she pulls out her sword and she's like, who goes there? And he's like, it's me, I'm Marble, let's be friends. And she's just like, oh my god, my prey has arrived, because she is actually out here hunting calicos, and he is a calico cat. So she's like, oh my god, my job fell right into my lap. And she goes, hiya, and she gonna get him. And then there's a little cutout here of Sir Peaches, her companion, grabbing her tail. That's important for lore. Just some of the magic stuff that happens. He needs to be touching her body in order to do some magic stuff. They cut off poor Marble's ear. Because he's a cat, he doesn't get killed. It just breaks one of his 9 souls, and he gets an injury. And then we see her sword continue the motion and hit into a tree. And then she's struggling to get her sword out of the tree, and he's like, what the heck is happening? And he's like, wait, I'm a raccoon. And Peaches grabs him and steps on him, and it's like, oh, sure thing. And then he's like, let's finish this. And they stand over him all menacing. So that's the action scene. There's more to it, but I figured I would just do a short snippet to go over what works well. So again, I think the start of this is effective. We have our setup, we have our character. In the pages before, we have seen him creeping this way, going through the underbrush. And we set up, here's our character, here's the scenery, here's the path that the characters are on that he's seeing. We do some close-ups. We're still aware of where everything is because of this establishing shot above it. And then we do a reverse shot. So in this panel, we're looking over Marble's shoulder down at the other cats. And then in the follow-up, we're looking at the cats up close and looking up at Marble. So it's just a little reverse, and it's still easy to follow because we know where we are. Everything has been established really strongly. And then as they are looking around, he is approaching. He shows up closer. Because in these transition shots, we've shown where they are in relation, it's not super confusing that he has approached and gotten closer. Things are easy to follow. That when she turns, we switch the camera around again, and he's in the foreground, she's in the background. Very reminiscent of this one here. It's easy to tell what's going on, and we can get into the action. I also really like this panel at the bottom here because it sets up the action really well. So one of the things that is difficult when you're showing like motion or action in your comic is that because it is a static medium, it's not an animation, it's not a movie, we can't show the physical motion of what's happening. We're just kind of showing a snapshot in the most impactful moment of something happening, and that is your panel. So in the case of this panel, the most impactful thing for what I need to show in this panel is that Larkbane is right about to strike Marble. Because on the next page, we're going to show the hit actually landing. I don't need to show all of it here. And this pose she's in is legible enough that I don't need to also have another panel showing her, like, raising the sword. You know, as she winds up. I just need one panel with her swing wound up. We get to see her expression. There's motion implied from like her belt moving over here and the bottom of her coat fanning out, that there is motion happening. She is moving from her pose, from the implied movement in the direction of things. We also have this like motion line of the sword arc coming around as she raises it. There's lots of indicators that she has moved, she is moving towards Marble, she has raised her sword. The motion line also gives the impression that it's moving quickly, like it's slashing through the air, where there's enough information in the single shot to understand she is coming at Marble, she is raising her sword, she is right about to strike him. And then, in the following page, there is the quick little shot of Peaches grabbing her tail, but that's like auxiliary information, like on the periphery information, where it's important to understand like the soul break for like magic lore reasons, but it's just an aside. Like, it doesn't take away from the action. It's just like in a split second. I guess it's implied because it is a small panel, and we understand from the previous page that she's moving. It is implied that because it's small and it's off to the side, it's like within a second, he's just grabbing her tail. That's the moment we're capturing. And then, again, we can only show one image in a panel. And so instead of having like, and I guess you could do this, you could have multiple panels when a hit is landing. You could show multiple panels to, I guess, imply like how hard the impact is. Or you could show like kind of moment to moment as it's happening to make it, to give it this like slow-mo feel. Like the more panels you put in, the slower it will feel to read through. But in this case, we went with one panel because we wanted to show, for one, we wanted to show that it was fast. And having one panel means that it's like a very quick moment instead of breaking it into like multiple panels and multiple actions. So we just have our arc of the sword. We can see where his ear has been severed in our story, because we do have like the souls and magic. Having this explosion of the soul does mean that like damage has been taken, but obviously that's not needed depending on your story. But just by seeing him moving, like he's dodging, we're seeing the slash of the sword, we're seeing the two parts of his ear, and because in a previous page we saw that his ear was intact, it is easy to tell that just from this one panel that his ear has been severed. And it's very impactful because we get to see his expression, we can see the soul breaking, and then very quickly, again on the periphery, because it's happening so quickly, we see the sword land in the tree. And I think that just helps imply like how fast it is. And it also helps that we're following the motion of the swing. So we saw the swing going off in this direction behind Marble, or I guess off to the side of Marble. And then we follow that motion, even though the panel is lower down. And then where it impacts into the tree, it's following that same motion. And then we pull out and we see the aftermath of this action. He's clutching his ear. He's fallen in a way that's kind of implied, where he's falling towards this side, where he's leaned on his one arm. He's fallen. He's like on his back, and his one arm has come up to cradle his ear. And then we can see that she has moved in that same direction that the swing went, and she's with her sword in the tree. She's dealing with it over here. And having that follow-up is really important. I think in the Sovereign example from the previous pages, it was just hard to tell because there wasn't any follow-up. We went from this impact panel of Rael hitting the mage, of the other pirate hitting the other soldier, and then there's no follow-up. That disappears, and we just focus on Elias and him scrambling away, and we don't come back to it. We don't see the proper aftermath of like where the mages really went. I guess they went overboard, but there was a big jump between up here and down here. So it's just frustrating to not really have closure on what happened in this panel, and I think that's what's really frustrating with it, is there's lots of setup, but there's no payoff. There's no resolution to it within the action scene. I think those are my tips for what to do with action scenes. It can be really difficult to kind of tell people what to do because action scenes are very different. They all require different things. I did try to grab 2 scenes that were similar in setup, where we have someone naively walking into someone who wants to harm them. We just happened to have 2 scenes that were similar, but when I'm just speaking to people, it is hard because there's a plethora of different kinds of action scenes and different like angles and setups that are needed for them. But I think the basics you can take away from this is that you always need your setup. I guess it comes from this earlier page, but it can just be from a panel if things are happening very quickly. But you need your setup where you show exactly where your characters are. That's something that's really important with keeping action clear and not confusing, is that we need to see the scenery, we need to see where characters are in relationship to each other. There will be a lot of pulled out shots where the camera is far away from our characters when you are in an action scene, because we need lots of visual information to understand what's going on. There's going to be a lot of changes happening in the positions of the characters, in their poses, where they are in the environment during an action scene, because a lot is happening really quickly. So we need lots of those pulled out shots where we see the outside information around our characters, and we need to clearly see like the bodies of the characters to understand like what actions they're taking. I do often see in like pages we've reviewed, people will have lots of like close-ups where it can be really hard to tell what the heck is happening. So I always recommend lots of pulled out shots showing full bodies of characters. And obviously you can have close-ups. For example, if you really need to focus on a hand grabbing something or like a punch landing, you know, we have close-ups on the swords and things, close-ups on characters' faces. But you really need to have clarity, and you need to show a lot of full body and background in your action scenes, and a lot of that is done in the setup phase. And then you have your action, where you need to clearly show everything that's happening. We have the action, and then we need a resolution where we see where things ended up. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps understand action scenes a little bit more. I can definitely do more videos about action and fight scenes. If people have more questions, I'd be happy to go over it more. So let me know in the questions below if you have any questions. Is there anything that wasn't very clear with this, or did you have something you're struggling with that I didn't go over? Please let me know. I would love to talk about this more. And that's it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys in another video. Goodbye!